Hello, and welcome to the Experimental Design in Qualtrics training module. I am Paul Byrne, Research Data Services Librarian at Syracuse University Libraries. What we will cover in this module is how to plan your randomization, how to use survey flow to assign respondents and/or treatments randomly, and examining the data to check for proper randomization. Randomization in Qualtrics has the ability to randomly assign respondents to different groups or experimental conditions. The key to making this work properly, though, is to plan randomization and questionnaire in detail before you even start doing anything in Qualtrics. The actual process of randomizing can be tedious depending on how complex your design is, and so planning will help avoid making mistakes. In the example study we use today, we want to determine if the number of sentences and the size of the text has an effect on the respondent's attitude toward the content of a short passage they will read. We will have two conditions for the number of sentences, 1 sentence or 3 sentences, and two conditions for the size of the text, large and small. This will give us a basic 2x2 design. In our study, each respondent will read one passage. They will answer one question to determine their comprehension of the passage, and this question is unique to each passage. And then they will answer one question to determine their attitude toward the passage. All respondents will answer this same question, and basically this is the dependent variable. Now, as I mentioned, planning is very, very important. What I suggest is creating a chart similar to what you see here, listing all the combinations of the independent variables. In our case, we have a 2x2 design, so that means 4 experimental conditions. And you can see here there are 4 rows, a column for the number of sentences, a column for the text size, and then columns for text, block, and flow. These last 3 columns will make more sense when we actually get into Qualtrics. I strongly suggest creating the instrument in a word processor first, not directly in Qualtrics. This will allow you to edit things more easily. You can organize the questions and treatments according to experimental group. And then when you're done, you can just copy and paste it into Qualtrics. You don't have to retype everything. So first you want to create the questionnaire in Qualtrics. Create a block for the informed consent, any instructions you have for each condition, and any other information you might need to gather. Name each block consistent with its purpose. Then you can copy and paste the text and questions into the appropriate blocks in Qualtrics, and check things off on the chart as you go along. Once you've created the survey instrument, you can then go in and create the survey flow. And this is where the randomization and the assignment to experimental groups occurs. First, be sure that all your blocks are in the appropriate order. And then you create a randomizer element, and this assigns respondents to each of the experimental conditions. You create a group element for each condition, and then you can use embedded data to create the independent variables and assign their values. Let's take a look at this in action. And here we are in Qualtrics and Microsoft Word. As I mentioned in the beginning, you should create a chart that lists all of your experimental groups and the values that you're assigning to each of the independent variables creating those groups. So here I have number of sentences and text size, and one sentence versus small text size, one sentence versus large text size, three sentences versus small, and three sentences with large. The text, block, and flow. The text is for when you're writing your text in Word. As I suggested, you should create your survey instrument in Word first, with each of the blocks and all of the questions and treatments that you can in the proper order. This just makes it a lot easier to keep things in order and keep track of everything. So I have my consent block, my instruction block, then my first block for my first experimental group, which is one sentence and small type. And what I would do is create that block and then check it off over here. As you can see, I named it block 1-1, and that goes along with 1-1 for numsent and text size. And then I go to the next block, create that, check it off again, etc. Once I have this completed in Word or whatever other word processing program you're using, I would then copy and paste each of these into Qualtrics. So let's go take a look at Qualtrics. As you can see, I've already done that in the interest of time, since I'm sure you know how to copy and paste. So I have my consent block, my instruction block, and I've named each of my blocks according to what I had in the chart, as well as in the Word document. And you can see I've also, with the individual questions, named those. Text 2-1 goes with block 2-1, question 2-1. That's so when you download the data and start analyzing it, it's easier to see what question goes with what block with what treatment. Then all the way through down to the dependent variable. This is actually the easiest part. As I mentioned, it can be very tedious. We have a very simple design here. Of course, if we added one more treatment to this, made a 2x2x2 design, we would now have 8 of these blocks. So you can see how this could get a little bit more complicated as your survey design gets more complicated. Now at this point, we're ready to actually set up the randomization. And we do that over here in Survey Flow. So you come in, you see we have all our blocks and they're all nice and laid out and named so that we know which is which. To create the randomizing the respondents to the various groups, you come under instruction or at least wherever you want to start the randomization, where your experimental design starts. And so for us, it starts after instruction. So we'll click below. Now we're going to click on Randomizer. It says randomly present 0 of the following elements because there's no elements under it yet. And evenly present elements. We're going to check that for right now, and We'll talk about this. It's very important. We'll talk about this in a couple of minutes. So now we start actually building our experimental design here. Click on Add a New Element here. And now we click on Group. And we can call this Group 1-1. And click Done. Come down to this element, new element here. And again, Group 1-2. Okay. Group 1-2. And finally, Group 2-2. Now, under each of these, there's Add New Element here. And now we're going to click on Embedded Data. And this is how we set up our independent variables. So first we'll do text size. Doesn't actually have it set up. Sentences. Set a value now. We'll say 1. Add a new field, and it's text size. And click on 1 again. Now what's important is if you come over here to Options, and you see that it's set to text. Well, you don't want it as text because when you go to later on go to your data and try to do crosstabs, it won't do a crosstab on a text for some reason. So you want to set both of these to number. And then click OK. Now at this point you can move block 1-1. So you see how I've named everything consistently. It's Group 1-1, 1-1, and 1-1. Now to make things a little bit easier, you need to do this, make 3 more embedded datas. It's easier if you just say duplicate. Then you can move this down here and then change the values accordingly. Actually, this needs to be here. So it's Group 1-2, 1-2. And we can move the block up. Now, as you go along and do this, you want to go in and check off that you've created those blocks. And that you've done the flow as well. Move it down here, and move that block up here, and one more. And you you just want to go back and double check block 22, 22, 22. Make sure that these are set to number. You want to do that for each of them. So now we come back here to the randomizer, and you see this automatically incremented up to 4 with each of the groups that we put under this randomizer. Well, we don't want them set. We don't want this set to 4 because that will assign each person to each group. That's not what we want. We only want them assigned to one group. So your response will come through, they'll do the consent, the instructions, and then they get to the randomizer, and randomly they will be assigned to one of these 4 groups. When it gets to the group, they'll be assigned their independent variables for number of sentences and text size, and then they'll go to the questions. Now up here we have evenly present elements. What this does is it makes sure as much as possible that you end up with a balanced design, namely the same number of people in each group. Now, of course, if you have 53 people total in your study, there's not going to be the same number of people in each group because 53 is not divisible by 4. But Qualtrics will do its very best to keep it as even as possible. And certainly if you had 40 people, there would be 10 in each. If you did not click this, then it's entirely possible that you could end up with a group with nobody in it. And that certainly is not what you want, at least in this particular instance. What this edit count is, and this is important for testing especially, is as people are assigned through the various groups, these numbers will increment as to how many people have been assigned into that group. So you can tell if it's working properly. And then we'll reset all counts at some point. We'll get back to this once we've generated some test data to do this with. So for right now, we just have to click close, give another quick look, make sure everything's okay, and then click apply to make sure that it saves it. Don't want to do all that work and have it disappear. And now we can go to the survey, and we are ready to start testing. Now that you've created your instrument and all of your survey flow, it is vitally important that you test your work before you distribute the survey. You can use generate test responses to examine your randomization. You should select a number of responses that is a multiple of the number of conditions or experimental groups in your study. In our particular example here, there are 4 experimental groups, so you want to pick something like 40, or even better, 100. You can then use survey reports to examine the frequencies for your independent variables. These should be evenly distributed within each condition, and you can use the breakout by option to examine crosstabs of each of your independent variables. If you find that you need to adjust your randomization or something else, be sure to first delete all of the previous test data and then reset all of the randomization counts. Any previous randomization counts or test data will just further make things confusing once you've changed your survey flow or randomization or anything else. Let's take a look. So once you have your survey all created and you've done your survey flow, you're ready to start testing your survey flow and your randomization. And you can do that by coming up to Tools and then Generate Test Responses. And you can create as many as you want. As I mentioned, you should create a multiple of the number of groups that you have. So we have 4. I'm going to say 100 because that will give us enough data to look at the crosstabs and have enough data in the cells to really get a good idea that everything is working properly. Then you click on Start Test, and this will take a moment. Once it's done, you can say Close. And then you come to Data and Analysis. And it will take a moment or two to generate the actual data and show it to you. So I'm going to pause here and we'll come back when it's ready. Okay, our data have been generated, and this is all just random data that Qualtrics developed. So to make sure that everything in our randomization worked properly, we're going to come over here to crosstabs. This will take a second. And this can take a little while, especially if you have a lot of data. I already generated it. And to do this, all you have to do is take your variables and drag them into the columns and or rows. In our example here, it doesn't matter which way you do it. And then you would want to click on Counts to fill in the table. And so the columns are number of sentences, and text size makes up the rows. And what you want to do is make sure that each of the individual cells has the same number of observations. In this case, we do, and that's wonderful. That's great. So what we could do now, since this worked properly, we can start actually either distributing our survey to actual respondents, or better yet, have some of your friends fill it out. Just to make sure that even, just the questions, this is a very cursory check to make sure. You want to have actual human beings fill it out to make sure that everything makes sense. But before you do either of those, you want to come back to Data. And at this point, you want to get rid of all this test data. You don't want it, even if you're going to have some friends do it, you don't want this messing up your pilot test data, or especially if you're about to distribute it, you don't want all this test data in with your real data. So you want to come over here to Tools, and then Delete Data, and All Responses. And click both of these. I am sure I want to delete. And this can take a couple of minutes. So you can just go here and hide this. And then what you want to do is come back to the survey. And go into the survey flow. And here's, again, with Edit Count. If you open that, see, now you see that there's 25 in each group. So that's one more check that your randomization worked properly. But of course now, especially if it didn't work properly, these would all be different numbers. And if you went back and reworked your survey flow, even if now that you've reworked it and now it's correct, if the numbers you're starting off here are incorrect, then your new numbers are going to be incorrect, because this just keeps incrementing all the way through until you come over here to reset all counts, and it sets everything back to 0. And then you come back here to save, and you're good. Now you can start distributing your survey and completing your work. In Qualtrics, you can also randomize the treatments that your respondents see. Sometimes you may want to show the respondent more than one stimulus, and you need to randomize the order in which they are shown in order to avoid order effects. In Qualtrics, you can nest randomizer elements. Again, you want to make sure that you evenly display the elements and reset all accounts as you do your testing, and of course before you distribute your survey. It's important to remember that each randomizer element is independent of all the others. And of course, be sure to test. The more randomizing you do, the more complicated things get, and you need to make sure that it works the way you expect it to. For this, you would need to download the data to something like SPSS, and then select Export Viewing Order Data for randomized surveys. Let's take a look. And here we are back in Qualtrics. Sometimes you might want to show a particular respondent more than one stimulus, more than one paragraph, more than one picture, video, whatever it might be. And that's what we're going to talk about now for a few minutes. This is the same basic design as our previous example, where there are 4 experimental groups for the 2 variables, number of sentences and text size. We've added in that each respondent, instead of being shown just one passage, is going to be shown 3. So that's A, B, and C for each condition. What we want, however, is that each of these passages are displayed to each respondent in a random order. And that's to mitigate any order effects there might be by everybody seeing A first, B second, and C third. Again, we do that in the survey flow, which I have already fleshed out because, as you can see, this would take a while. But just like in our first example, we have the randomizer and each of our groups. And so up to the embedded data, it's the same as our previous example. But now within each group, we have another randomizer. So as you can see, you can nest randomizer elements within each other. Also, this time we say randomly present 3 of the following elements. And of course, there are just 3. That's because we want each respondent to see all 3, but in a random order for each respondent. So maybe the first respondent will come in and they'll see A, C, B. And then the next one will come in and they'll see B, C, A. And then the third one might see it in A, B, C. Again, you still want evenly present elements, so that all of these are presented to each respondent. And of course you want to do the edit counts, etc. But you can see how this is randomized within each condition. two things I want to point out to you is that each of these randomizer elements, this one, the ones in each of these groups, are all independent of each other. So these will work pretty much as you expect. But however, this randomizer element acts in displaying these three blocks to the respondent will be independent of what this one does. Now the other thing that's perhaps more important that you are aware of is that this will present three of the following elements in a random order. So of course, in this instance, there would be 6 different orders that could be shown to any particular respondent. This does not mean randomly present or evenly present that each of those 6 orders will be presented to the respondents. This only applies to these blocks and not to the specific order. So it's possible that only one person assigned to this particular condition will see these blocks in A, B, C order. So if making sure that all of the particular orders are displayed, you would need to figure out a different way of randomizing this. Now to test this, of course, you want to make sure that all the counts are at 0. And that there are no previous data. We'll come back to survey. Undo tools. Generate test responses. This time we're going to give a lot because you want extra data in there because of all the nested randomization. So I'm going to say 400 this time around. And we'll come back when the data are. Okay, all of our test data have been generated and we have 400 responses. We can come over here to crosstabs and you can see that I've already created one crosstab and all of the cells have the same number of observations, so we know that the respondents were indeed randomly assigned properly to each of the 4 experimental groups. The thing is, that doesn't tell us anything about how the 3 individual blocks were displayed to each particular respondent. And unfortunately, the only way to take a look at that is to actually download the data into something like SPSS. To do that, you come over to Export and Import, and then Export Data. Select SPSS. You could do it in Excel too, but I find SPSS a little bit easier. Either way, you definitely want to come down to More Options and click on Export Viewing Order Data for Randomized Surveys. You click on Download, and it will download it right into SPSS. It could take a couple of minutes, so I've already done that. So I'm just going to close that, come over here, and in SPSS you can see all of the variables, all the extra variables it creates automatically, all the variables we created. And then down here you see our independent variables that we created with the embedded data elements. Then all these FL5, DO, these are all information about the randomization that Qualtrics did. So let's go back to Qualtrics for a second and we'll go to survey. Then to the survey flow. What I'm going to do is come up here to the top corner and click on Show Flow IDs. Now you can see there's these little tiny IDs, numbers, in the top corners of each of these elements. Those correspond to this information, the FL5, FL46, etc. So you can see here FL5, that's the first randomizer element, and so on down the line. So this one, FL5DO FL34, refers to this particular group. And so on down the line. And then you get into the various blocks. You can see FL46 is right here. That's that randomizer. And then block 11A, block 11B, 11C, etc. Now you want to look at the frequencies of these to make sure that it's relatively even. And so we can see FL46 display order block 11A. That corresponds to this block here. And what this is telling you is that block 11A was the first block to shown to 26 people. 42 people saw it second, and 32 people saw it third. Then the same for block 11B. 38 people saw it first, 22 people saw it second, 40 people saw it third, and so on down the line for all of them. Now, as I mentioned, you can see here the total 100, 100, 100. That's good. That means that it was shown, each of those blocks was shown to 100 people as it should have been. But the exact possible orders, that you can't really, there's 6 possible ways of showing each of these blocks to your respondents. There's no way of making that necessarily even in this particular setup. There might be another setup where you can do that. But what you do want to make sure of is that, like block 1, 2A, it's not 0 in here, which means that was never shown first. So these are being shown in a random order for each respondent. It's just that all of the particular orders may not be represented evenly. So, in conclusion, planning is the key to the success of your project. You should have all of your materials ready and set out before you start building your instrument in Qualtrics. And do everything step by step and keep track of what step you are on. As I've said, things can get a little tedious and you need to just be patient and keep track of what you're doing. And above all, test your work. Thank you. We welcome your comments and suggestions. Our contact information is on the web page.